How to write a Blackwood article in the name of the prophet figs. Cry of Turkish fig peddler. I presume everybody has heard of me. My name is the Signora Psyche Zenobia. This I know to be a fact. Nobody bnt my enemies ever calls me sucky snobs. I have been assured that sucky is but a vulgar corruption of psyche, which is good Greek, and means the su f, that s me, I'm all soul, and sometimes a butterfly, which latter meaning undoubtedly alludes to my appearance in my new crimson satin dress, with the sky blue Arabian mantelet, and the trimmings of green agraffas, and the 7 flounces of orange-colored auriculas. As for snobs, any person who should look at me would be instantly aware that my name wasn't Snobs. Miss Tabitha Turnip propagated that report through sheer envy. Tabitha Turnip indeed. Oth little wretch. But what can we expect from a turnip? Wonder if she remembers the old adage about blood out of a turnip, etc. Put her in mind of it the first opportunity. Again pull her nose. Where was I? I have been assured that Snobs is a mere corruption of Zenobia, and that Zenobia was a queen, so am I. Dr. Moneypenny always calls me the Queen of Hearts, and that Zenobia, as well as Psyche, is good Greek, and that my father was a Greek, and that consequently I have a right to our patronymic, which is Zenobia, and not by any means Snobs. Nobody but Tabitha Turnip calls me sucky Snobs. I am the Signora Psyche Zenobia. As I said before, everybody has heard of me. I am that very Signora Psyche Zenobia, so justly celebrated as corresponding secretary to the Philadelphia, Regular, Exchange, Total, Young, Bell's, Lettres, Universal, Experimental, Bibliographical, Association, to Civilize, Humanity Drive. Moneypenny made the title for us, and says he chose it because it sounded big like an empty rum puncheon. A vulgar man that sometimes, but he's deep. We all signed the initials of the society after our names, in the fashion of the R.S.A., Royal Society of Arts, the S.D., UK, Society for the Diffusion of Useful Knowledge, etc., etc. Dr. Moneypenny says that S stands for stale, and that D. UK spells duck, but it don't, and that SDUK stands for stale duck, and not for Lord Brougham's Society but then drive. Moneypenny is such a queer man that I am never sure when he is telling me the truth. At any rate, we always add to our names the initials P. RETTYBLUE. BATCH, that is to say, Philadelphia, Regular, Exchange, Total, Young, Bell's, Lettres, Universal, Experimental, Bibliographical, Association, to Civilize, Humanity. 1 letter for each word, which is a decided improvement upon Lord Brougham. Dr. Moneypenny will have it that our initials give our true character, but for my life I can't see what he means. Notwithstanding the good offices of the doctor, and the strenuous exertions of the association to get itself into notice, it met with no very great success until I joined it. The truth is, the members indulged in too flippant a tone of discussion. The papers read every Saturday evening were characterized less by depth than buffoonery. They were all whip syllabub. There was no investigation of first causes, first principles. There was no investigation of anything at all. There was no attention paid to that great point, the fitness of things. In short, there was no fine writing like this. It was all low virile, no profundity, no reading, no metaphysics, nothing which the learned call spirituality, and which the unlearned choose to stigmatize as cant. Dr. M says I ought to spell cant with a capital K, but I know better. When I joined the society, it was my endeavor to introduce a better style of thinking and writing, and all the world knows how well I have succeeded. We get up as good papers now in the PRETTYBLUEBATCH as any to be found even in Blackwood. I say, Blackwood, because I have been assured that the finest writing, upon every subject, is to be discovered in the pages of that justly celebrated magazine. We now take it for our model upon all themes, and are getting into rapid notice accordingly. And, after all, it's not so very difficult a matter to compose an article of the genuine Blackwood stamp, if one only goes properly about it. Of course I don't speak of the political articles. Everybody knows how they are managed, since Dr. Moneypenny explained it. Mr. Blackwood has a pair of tailor's shears, and 3 apprentices who stand by him for orders. One hands him the Times, another the Examiner, and a third a Gully's new compendium of slang-wang. Mr. B merely cuts out and intersperses. It is soon done nothing but Examiner, slang-wang, and Times, then Times, slang-wang, and Examiner, and then Times, Examiner, and slang-wang. But the chief merit of the magazine lies in its miscellaneous articles. And the best of these come under the head of what Dr. Moneypenny calls the bizarreries, whatever that may mean, and what everybody else calls the intensities. This is a species of writing which I have long known how to appreciate, although it is only since my late visit to Mr. Blackwood, deputed by the Society, that I have been made aware of the exact method of composition. This method is very simple, but not so much so as the politics. Upon my calling at Mr. B.'s, and making known to him the wishes of the Society, he received me with great civility, took me into his study, and gave me a clear explanation of the whole process. "My dear madam," said he, evidently struck with my majestic appearance, for I had on the crimson satin, with the green agraffas, and orange-collared auriculas. "My dear madam," said he, "sit down. The matter stands thus: in the first place, your writer of intensities must have very black ink, and a very big pen, with a very blunt nib. And, mark me, Miss Psyche Zenobial," he continued, after a pause, with the most expressive energy and solemnity of manner, "mark me, that pen must never be mended. Herein, madam, lies the secret, the soul, of intensity. I assume upon myself to say, that no individual, of however great genius, ever wrote with a good pen, understand me, z good article. You may take it for granted, that when manuscript can be read it is never worth reading. This is a leading principle in our faith, to which if you cannot readily assent, our conference is at an end." He paused. But, of course, as I had no wish to put an end to the conference, I assented to a proposition so very obvious, and one, too, of whose truth I had all along been sufficiently aware. He seemed pleased, and went on with his instructions. "It may appear invidious in me, Miss Psyche Zenobia, to refer you to an article, or set of articles, in the way of model or study, yet perhaps I may as well call your attention to a few cases. Let me see. There was the dead alive, a capital thing. The record of a gentleman's sensations when entombed before the breath was out of his body, full of taste, terror, sentiment, metaphysics, and erudition. You would have sworn that the writer had been born and brought up in a coffin. Then we had the confessions of an opium eater, fine, very fine. Glorious imagination, deep philosophy, acute speculation, plenty of fire and fury, and a good spicing of the decidedly unintelligible. That was a nice bit of flummery, and went down the throats of the people delightfully. They would have it that Coleridge wrote the paper, but not so. It was composed by my pet baboon. Juniper, over a rummer of Hollands and water, hot, without sugar. This I could scarcely have believed had it been anybody but Mr. Blackwood, who assured me of it. Then there was the involuntary experimentalist, all about a gentleman who got baked in an oven, and came out alive and well, although certainly done to a turn. And then there was the diary of a late physician, where the merit lay in good rant, and indifferent Greek, both of them, taking things with the public. And then there was the Man in the Bell, a paper by the by, Miss Zenobia, which I cannot sufficiently recommend to your attention. It is the history of a young person who goes to sleep under the clapper of a church bell, and is awakened by its tolling for a funeral. The sound drives him mad, and, accordingly, pulling out his tablets, he gives a record of his sensations. Sensations are the great things after all. Should you ever be drowned or hung, be sure and make a note of your sensations, they will be worth to you 10 guineas a sheet. If you wish to write forcibly, Miss Zenobia, pay minute attention to the sensations. That I certainly will, Mr. Blackwood, said I. Good, he replied. I see you are a pupil after my own heart. But I must put you au fait to the details necessary in composing what may be denominated a genuine Blackwood article of the sensation stamp, the kind which you will understand me to say I consider the best for all purposes. The first thing requisite is to get yourself into such a scrape as no one ever got into before. The oven, for instance, that was a good hit. But if you have no oven, or big bell, at hand, and if you cannot conveniently tumble out of a balloon, or be swallowed up in an earthquake, or get stuck fast in a chimney, you will have to be contented with simply imagining some similar misadventure. I should prefer, however, that you have the actual fact to bear you out. Nothing so well assists the fancy, as an experimental knowledge of the matter in hand. Truth is strange, you know, stranger than fiction, besides being more to the purpose. Here I assured him I had an excellent pair of garters, and would go and hang myself forthwith. Good, he replied, do so, although hanging is somewhat hackneyed. Perhaps you might do better. Take a dose of Brandreth's pills, and then give us your sensations. However, my instructions will apply equally well to any variety of misadventure, and on your way home you may easily get knocked in the head, or run over by an omnibus, or bitten by a mad dog, or drowned in a gutter. But to proceed. Having determined upon your subject, you must next consider the tone, or manner, of your narration. There is the tone didactic, the tone enthusiastic, the tone natural, all commonplace enough. But then there is the tone laconic, or curt, which has lately come much into use. It consists in short sentences. Somehow thus, can't be too brief. Can't be too snappish. Always a full stop. And never a paragraph. Then there is the tone elevated, diffusive, and interjectional. Some of our best novelists patronize this tone. The words must be all in a whirl, like a humming top, and make a noise very similar, which answers remarkably well instead of meaning. This is the best of all possible styles where the writer is in too great a hurry to think. The tone metaphysical is also a good one. If you know any big words, this is your chance for them. Talk of the Ionic and Eleatic schools of Archytas, Gorgias, and Alcmaeon. Say something about objectivity and subjectivity. Be sure and abuse a man named Locke. Turn up your nose at things in general, and when you let slip anything a little too absurd, you need not be at the trouble of scratching it out, but just add a footnote and say that you are indebted for the above profound observation to the critic Duranum Vernon / or to the Metaphysisk and Fangsgrien der Nature Wissenschaft / this will look erudite and frank. There are various other tones of equal celebrity, but I shall mention only two more, the tone transcendental and the tone heterogeneous. In the former the merit consists in seeing into the nature of affairs a very great deal farther than anybody else. This second sight is very efficient when properly managed. A little reading of the dial will carry you a great way. Eschew, in this case, big words, get them as small as possible, and write them upside down. Look over Channing's poems and quote what he says about a fat little man with a delusive show of can. Put in something about the supernal oneness. Don't say a syllable about the infernal two-ness. Above all, study innuendo. Hint everything, assert nothing. If you feel inclined to say bread and butter, do not by any means say it outright. You may say anything and everything approaching to bread and butter. You may hint at buckwheat cake, or you may even go so far as to insinuate oatmeal porridge, but if bread and butter be your real meaning, be cautious, my dear Miss Psyche, not on any account to say bread and butter. I assured him that I should never say it again as long as I lived. He kissed me and continued, as for the tone heterogeneous, it is merely a judicious mixture, in equal proportions, of all the other tones in the world, and is consequently made up of everything deep, great, odd, piquant, pertinent, and pretty. Let us suppose now you have determined upon your incidents and tone. The most important portion, in fact, the soul of the whole business, is yet to be attended to. I allude to the filling up. It is not to be supposed that a lady, or gentleman either, has been leading the life of a bookworm. And yet above all things it is necessary that your article have an air of erudition, or at least afford evidence of extensive general reading. Now I'll put you in the way of accomplishing this point. See here. Pulling down some 3 or 4 ordinary-looking volumes, and opening them at random. By casting your eye down almost any page of any book in the world, you will be able to perceive at once a host of little scraps of either learning or bel esprit for sm, which are the very thing for the spicing of a Blackwood article. You might as well note down a few while I read them to you. I shall make 2 divisions. First, piquant facts for the manufacture of similes, and second, piquant expressions to be introduced as occasion may require. Write now. And I wrote as he dictated. Piquant facts for similes. There were originally but 3 muses: Melot, Mneme, Aoidae, meditation, memory, and singing. You may make a good deal of that little fact if properly worked. You see, it is not generally known, and looks recherché. You must be careful and give the thing with a downright improviso air. Again. The river Alpheus passed beneath the sea, and emerged without injury to the purity of its waters. Rather stale that, to be sure, but, if properly dressed and dished up, will look quite as fresh as ever. Here is something better. The Persian iris appears to some persons to possess a sweet and very powerful perfume, while to others it is perfectly scentless. Find that, and very delicate. Turn it about a little, and it will do wonders. We'll have something else in the botanical line. There's nothing goes down so well, especially with the help of a little Latin. Right? The Epidendrum flos aries, of Java, bears a very beautiful flower, and will live when pulled up by the roots. The natives suspend it by a cord from the ceiling, and enjoy its fragrance for years. That's capital. That will do for the similes. Now for the piquant expressions. Piquant expressions. The venerable Chinese novel Ju Kiao Li. Good. By introducing these few words with dexterity you will evince your intimate acquaintance with the language and literature of the Chinese. With the aid of this you may possibly get along without either Arabic, or Sanskrit, or Chickasaw. There is no passing muster, however, without Spanish, Italian, German, Latin, and Greek. I must look you out a little specimen of each. Any scrap will answer, because you must depend upon your own ingenuity to make it fit into your article. Now write. Ost tendre que Zahir, as tender as Zahir French. Alludes to the frequent repetition of the phrase, La tendre Zahir, in the French tragedy of that name. Properly introduced, will show not only your knowledge of the language, but your general reading and wit. You can say, for instance, that the chicken you were eating, write an article about being choked to death by a chicken bone, was not altogether aussi tendre que Zahir, right? En muert tan escondida. Que no te sienta venir, porque el placer del monte no mest orna dar la vida * that's Spanish from Miguel de Cervantes. Come quickly, zero death. But be sure and don't let me see you coming, lest the pleasure I shall feel at your appearance should unfortunately bring me back again to life. This you may slip in quite a propos when you are struggling in the last agonies with the chicken bone. Right? Tl pover uomo che non se * en era accorto, andava combattendo, e era morto / that's Italian, you perceive from Ariosto. It means that a great hero, in the heat of combat, not perceiving that he had been fairly killed, continued to fight valiantly, dead as he was. The application of this to your own case is obvious, for I trust, Miss Psyche, that you will not neglect to kick for at least an hour and a half after you have been choked to death by that chicken bone. Please to write. VND Sturhichdok so Sturb ich DTNN Dirk Sie Dirk Seal, that's German from Schiller. And if I die, at least I die for thee for thee. Here it is clear that you are apostrophizing the cause of your disaster, the chicken. Indeed, what gentleman, or lady either, of sense, wouldn't die, I should like to know, for a well-fattened capon of the right Molucca breed, stuffed with capers and mushrooms, and served up in a salad bowl, with orange jellies and mastiques. Right? You can get them that way at Tortoni's. Right, if you please. Here is a nice little Latin phrase, and rare too. One can't be too recherché or brief in one's Latin, it's getting so common. Ignoratio elenchum, he has committed an ignoratio elenchi, that is to say, he has understood the words of your proposition, but not the idea. The man was a fool, you see. Some poor fellow whom you address while choking with that chicken bone, and who therefore didn't precisely understand what you were talking about. Throw the ignoratio elenchi in his teeth, and, at once, you have him annihilated. If he dares to reply, you can tell him from Lucan, here it is, that speeches are mere anemone verborum, anemone words. The anemone, with great brilliancy, has no smell. Or, if he begins to bluster, you may be down upon him with insomnia Jovis, reveries of Jupiter, a phrase which Silius Italicus, see here, applies to thoughts pompous and inflated. This will be sure and cut him to the heart. He can do nothing but roll over and die. Will you be kind enough to write? In Greek we must have something pretty from Demosthenes, for example. Aviko pevkovze jaktiv peki etai. Anarophiagon kai palin make seta. There is a tolerably good translation of it in Hudibrastor, he that flies may fight again, which he can never do that's slain. In a Blackwood article nothing makes so fine a show as your Greek. The very letters have an air of profundity about them. Only observe, madam, the astute look of that epsilon. That phi ought certainly to be a bishop. Was ever there a smarter fellow than that Omicron? Just twig that tau? In short, there is nothing like Greek for a genuine sensation paper. In the present case your application is the most obvious thing in the world. Rap out the sentence, with a huge oath, and by way of ultimatum at the good-for-nothing dunder-headed villain who couldn't understand your plain English in relation to the chicken bone. He'll take the hint and be off, you may depend upon it. These were all the instructions Mr. B could afford me upon the topic in question, but I felt they would be entirely sufficient. I was, at length, able to write a genuine Blackwood article, and determined to do it forthwith. In taking leave of me, Mr. B made a proposition for the purchase of the paper when written, but as he could offer me only 50 guineas a sheet, I thought it better to let our society have it, than sacrifice it for so paltry a sum. Notwithstanding this niggardly spirit, however, the gentleman showed his consideration for me in all other respects, and indeed treated me with the greatest civility. His parting words made a deep impression upon my heart, and I hope I shall always remember them with gratitude. My dear Miss Zenobia, he said, while the tears stood in his eyes, is there anything else I can do to promote the success of your laudable undertaking? Let me reflect. It is just possible that you may not be able, so soon as convenient, to get yourself drowned, or choked with a chicken bone, or hung, or bitten by a but stay. Now I think me of it, there are a couple of very excellent bulldogs in the yard, fine fellows, I assure you, savage, and all that, indeed just the thing for your money. They'll have you eaten up, auriculas and all, in less than 5 minutes. Here's my watch. And then only think of the sensations. Here. I say, Tom. Peter. Dick, you villain. Let out those. But as I was really in a great hurry, and had not another moment to spare, I was reluctantly forced to expedite my departure, and accordingly took leave at once somewhat more abruptly, I admit, than strict courtesy would have otherwise allowed. It was my primary object upon quitting Mr. Blackwood, to get into some immediate difficulty, pursuant to his advice, and with this view I spent the greater part of the day in wandering about Edinburgh, seeking for desperate adventures adequate to the intensity of my feelings, and adapted to the vast character of the article I intended to write. In this excursion I was attended by one negro servant, Pompey, and my little lapdog Diana, whom I had brought with me from Philadelphia. It was not, however, until late in the afternoon that I fully succeeded in my arduous undertaking. An important event then happened of which the following Blackwood article, in the tone heterogeneous, is the substance and result. What chance, good lady, hath bereft you thus? Conx Jays. It was a quiet and still afternoon when I strolled forth in the goodly city of Edina. The confusion and bustle in the streets were terrible. Men were talking. Women were screaming. Children were choking. Pigs were whistling. Carts they rattled. Bulls they bellowed. Cows they lowed. Horses they neighed. Cats they caterwauled. Dogs they danced. Danced. Could it then be possible? Danced. Alas, thought I, my dancing days are over. Thus it is ever. What a host of gloomy recollections will ever and anon be awakened in the mind of genius and imaginative contemplation, especially of a genius doomed to the everlasting and eternal and continual, and, as one might say, the continued yes, the continued and continuous, bitter, harassing, disturbing, and, if I may be allowed the express, Zion, the very disturbing influence of the serene and godlike and heavenly, and exalting, and elevated, and purifying effect of what may be rightly termed the most enviable, the most truly enviable, nay, the most benignly beautiful, the most deliciously ethereal, and, as it were, the most pretty, if I may use so bold an expression, thing, pardon me. Gentle reader, one, in the world, but I am always led away by my feelings. In such a mind, I repeat, what a host of recollections are stirred up by a trifle. The dogs danced. One could not. They frisked, I wept. They capered, I sobbed aloud. Touching circumstances, which cannot fail to bring to the recollection of the classical reader that exquisite passage in relation to the fitness of things, which is to be found in the commencement of the third volume of that admirable and venerable Chinese novel The Jogo Slow. In my solitary walk through the city I had two humble but faithful companions. Diana, my poodle. Sweetest of creatures. She had a quantity of hair over her one eye, and a blue ribbon tied fashionably around her neck. Diana was not more than 5 inches in height, but her head was somewhat bigger than her body, and her tail being cut off exceedingly close, gave an air of injured innocence to the interesting animal which rendered her a favorite with all. And Pompey, my negro. Sweet Pompey. How shall I ever forget thee? I had taken Pompey's arm. He was 3 feet in height, I like to be particular, and about 70, or perhaps 80, years of age. He had bow legs and was corpulent. His mouth should not be called small, nor his ears short. His teeth, however, were like pearl, and his large full eyes were deliciously white. Nature had endowed him with no neck, and had placed his ankles, as usual with that race, in the middle of the upper portion of the feet. He was clad with a striking simplicity. His sole garments were a stock of 9 inches in height, and a nearly new drab overcoat which had formerly been in the service of the tall, stately, and illustrious Drive. Moneypenny. It was a good overcoat. It was well cut. It was well made. The coat was nearly new. Pompey held it up out of the dirt with both hands. There were 3 persons in our party, and 2 of them have already been the subject of remark. There was a third. That person was myself. I am the Signora Psyche Zenobia. I am not Sucky Snobs. My appearance is commanding. On the memorable occasion of which I speak I was habited in a crimson satin dress, with a sky-blue Arabian mantelet. And the dress had trimmings of green agrafas, and 7 graceful flounces of the orange-collared auricula. I thus formed the third of the party. There was the poodle. There was Pompey. There was myself. We were three. Thus it is said there were originally but three furies: melty, nimi, and heady meditation, memory, and fiddling. Leaning upon the arm of the gallant Pompey, and attended at a respectable distance by Diana, I proceeded down one of the populous and very pleasant streets of the now deserted Edina. On a sudden, there presented itself to view a church, a Gothic cathedral, vast, venerable, and with a tall steeple, which towered into the sky. What madness now possessed me? Why did I rush upon my fate? I was seized with an uncontrollable desire to ascend the giddy pinnacle, and then survey the immense extent of the city. The door of the cathedral stood invitingly open. My destiny prevailed. I entered the ominous archway. Where then was my guardian angel? If indeed such angels there be. If. Distressing monosyllable. What a world of mystery, and meaning, and doubt, and uncertainty is there involved in thy two letters. I entered the ominous archway. I entered, and, without injury to my orange-colored auriculas, I passed beneath the portal, and emerged within the vestibule. Thus it is said the immense river Alfred passed, unscathed, and unwetted, beneath the sea. I thought the staircase would never have an end. Round. Yes, they went round and up, and round and up and round and up, until I could not help surmising, with the sagacious Pompey, upon whose supporting arm I leaned in all the confidence of early affection, I could not help surmising that the upper end of the continuous spiral ladder had been accidentally, or perhaps designedly, removed. I paused for breath, and, in the meantime, an accident occurred of too momentous a nature in a moral, and also in a metaphysical point of view, to be passed over without notice. It appeared to me, indeed I was quite confident of the fact, I could not be mistaken, I had, for some moments, carefully and anxiously observed the motions of my Diana. I say that / could not be mistaken. Diana smelt a rat. At once I called Pompey's attention to the subject, and he agreed with me. There was then no longer any reasonable room for doubt. The rat had been smelled, and by Diana. Heavens! Shall I ever forget the intense excitement of the moment? The rat, it was there, that is to say, it was somewhere. Diana smelled the rat. One could not. Thus it is said the Prussian Isis has, for some persons, a sweet and very powerful perfume, while to others it is perfectly scentless. The staircase had been surmounted, and there were now only 3 or 4 more upward steps intervening between us and the summit. We still ascended, and now only 1 step remained. 1 step, one little step, upon one such little step in the great staircase of human life how vast a sum of human happiness or misery depends. I thought of myself, then of Pompey, and then of the mysterious and inexplicable destiny which surrounded us. I thought of Pompey. Alas, I thought of love. I thought of my many false steps which have been taken, and may be taken again. I resolved to be more cautious, more reserved. I abandoned the arm of Pompey, and, without his assistance, surmounted the one remaining step, and gained the chamber of the belfry. I was followed immediately afterward by my poodle. Pompey alone remained behind. I stood at the head of the staircase, and encouraged him to ascend. He stretched forth to me his hand, and unfortunately in so doing was forced to abandon his firm hold upon the overcoat. Will the gods never cease their persecution? The overcoat is dropped, and, with one of his feet, Pompey stepped upon the long and trailing skirt of the overcoat. He stumbled and fell. This consequence was inevitable. He fell forward, and, with his accursed head, striking me full in the breast, precipitated me headlong, together with himself, upon the hard, filthy, and detestable floor of the belfry. But my revenge was sure, sudden, and complete. Seizing him furiously by the wool with both hands, I tore out a vast quantity of black, and crisp, and curling material, and tossed it from me with every manifestation of disdain. It fell among the ropes of the belfry and remained. Pompey arose, and said no word. But he regarded me piteously with his large eyes and sighed. Ye gods, that sigh! It sunk into my heart. And the hair, the wool. Could I have reached that wool, I would have bathed it with my tears, in testimony of regret. But alas! It was now far beyond my grasp. As it dangled among the cordage of the bell, I fancied it alive. I fancied that it stood on end, mth indignation. Thus the happy dandy Flos aries of Java, bears, it is said, a beautiful flower, which will live when pulled up by the roots. The natives suspend it by a cord from the ceiling and enjoy its fragrance for years. Our quarrel was now made up, and we looked about the room for an aperture through which to survey the city of Edina. Windows there were none. The sole light admitted into the gloomy chamber proceeded from a square opening, about a foot in diameter, at a height of about 7 feet from the floor. Yet what will the energy of true genius not effect? I resolved to clamber up to this hole. A vast quantity of wheels, pinions, and other cabalistic-looking machinery stood opposite the hole, close to it, and through the hole there passed an iron rod from the machinery. Between the wheels and the wall where the hole lay there was barely room for my body, yet I was desperate, and determined to persevere. I called Pompey to my side. You perceive that aperture, Pompey? I wish to look through it. You will stand here just beneath the hole, so. Now, hold out one of your hands, Pompey, and let me step upon it thus. Now, the other hand, Pompey, and with its aid I will get upon your shoulders. He did everything I wished, and I found, upon getting up, that I could easily pass my head and neck through the aperture. The prospect was sublime. Nothing could be more magnificent. I merely paused a moment to bid Diana behave herself, and assure Pompey that I would be considerate and bear as lightly as possible upon his shoulders. I told him I would be tender of his feelings, aussi tender que beefsteak. Having done this justice to my faithful friend, I gave myself up with great zest and enthusiasm to the enjo5anent of the scene which so obligingly spread itself out before my eyes. Upon this subject, however, I shall forbear to dilate. I will not describe the city of Edinburgh. Every one has been to the city of Edinburgh. Every one has been to Edinburgh, the classic Edina. I will confine myself to the momentous details of my own lamentable adventure. Having, in some measure, satisfied my curiosity in regard to the extent, situation, and general appearance of the city, I had leisure to survey the church in which I was, and the delicate architecture of the steeple. I observed that the aperture through which I had thrust my head was an opening in the dial plate of a gigantic clock, and must have appeared, from the street, as a large keyhole, such as we see in the face of the French watches. No doubt the true object was to admit the arm of an attendant, to adjust, when necessary, the hands of the clock from within. I observed also, with surprise, the immense size of these hands, the longest of which could not have been less than 10 feet in length, and, where broadest, 8 or 9 inches in breadth. They were of solid steel apparently, and their edges appeared to be sharp. Having noticed these particulars, and some others, I again turned my eyes upon the glorious prospect below, and soon became absorbed in contemplation. From this, after some minutes, I was aroused by the voice of Pompey, who declared that he could stand it no longer, and requested that I would be so kind as to come down. This was unreasonable, and I told him so in a speech of some length. He replied, but with an evident misunderstanding of my ideas upon the subject. I accordingly grew angry, and told him in plain words, that he was a fool, that he had committed an ignoramus e clenchi, that his notions were mere insomere bovis, and his words little better than an animuere borem. With this he appeared satisfied, and I resumed my contemplations. It might have been half an hour after this altercation when, as I was deeply absorbed in the heavenly scenery beneath me, I was startled by something very cold which pressed with a gentle pressure on the back of my neck. It is needless to say that I felt inexpressibly alarmed. I knew that Pompey was beneath my feet, and that Diana was sitting, according to my explicit directions, upon her hind legs, in the farthest corner of the room. What could it be? Alas! I but too soon discovered. Turning my head gently to one side, I perceived, to my extreme horror, that the huge, glittering, scimitar-like minute hand of the clock had, in the course of its hourly revolution, descended upon my neck. There was, I knew, not a second to be lost. I pulled back at once, but it was too late. There was no chance of forcing my head through the mouth of that terrible trap in which it was so fairly caught, and which grew narrower and narrower with a rapidity too horrible to be conceived. The agony of that moment is not to be imagined. I threw up my hands and endeavored, with all my strength, to force upward the ponderous iron bar. I might as well have tried to lift the cathedral itself. Down, down, down it came, closer and yet closer. I screamed to Pompey for aid, but he said that I had hurt his feelings by calling him an ignorant old squint. I yelled to Diana, but she only said bow wow wow, and that I had told her on no account to stir from the corner. Thus I had no relief to expect from my associates. Meantime the ponderous and terrific scythe of time, for I now discovered the literal import of that classical phrase, had not stopped, nor was it likely to stop, in its career. Down and still down, it came. It had already buried its sharp edge a full inch in my flesh, and my sensations grew indistinct and confused. At one time I fancied myself in Philadelphia with the stately Dr. Moneypenny, at another in the back parlor of Mr. Blackwood receiving his invaluable instructions. And then again the sweet recollection of better and earlier times came over me, and I thought of that happy period when the world was not all a desert, and Pompey not altogether cruel. The ticking of the machinery amused me. Amused me, I say, for my sensations now bordered upon perfect happiness, and the most trifling circumstances afforded me pleasure. The eternal click-clack, click-clack, click-clack of the clock was the most melodious of music in my ears, and occasionally even put me in mind of the graceful sermonic harangues of Drive, Olipod. Then there were the great figures upon the dial plate. How intelligent, how intellectual, they all looked. And presently they took to dancing the mazurka, and I think it was the figure V who performed the most to my satisfaction. She was evidently a lady of breeding. None of your swaggerers, and nothing at all indelicate in her motions. She did the pirouette to admiration, whirling round upon her apex. I made an endeavor to hand her a chair, for I saw that she appeared fatigued with her exertions, and it was not until then that I fully perceived my lamentable situation. Lamentable indeed. The bar had buried itself 2 inches in my neck. I was aroused to a sense of exquisite pain. I prayed for death, and, in the agony of the moment, could not help repeating those exquisite verses of the poet Miguel de Cervantes, Vani Buren, tan escondida queri no te sente veni. Pork and pleasure, deli mori nami, torni, dari, whittle. But now a new horror presented itself, and one indeed sufficient to startle the strongest nerves. My eyes, from the cruel pressure of the machine, were absolutely starting from their sockets. While I was thinking how I should possibly manage without them, one actually tumbled out of my head, and, rolling down the steep side of the steeple, lodged in the rain gutter which ran along the eaves of the main building. The loss of the eye was not so much as the insolent air of independence and contempt with which it regarded me after it was out. There it lay in the gutter just under my nose, and the airs it gave itself would have been ridiculous had they not been disgusting. Such a winking and blinking were never before seen. This behavior on the part of my eye in the gutter was not only irritating on account of its manifest insolence and shameful ingratitude, but was also exceedingly inconvenient on account of the sympathy which always exists between 2 eyes of the same head, however far apart. I was forced, in a manner, to wink and to blink, whether I would or not, in exact concert with the scoundrelly thing that lay just under my nose. I was presently relieved, however, by the dropping out of the other eye. In falling it took the same direction, possibly a concerted plot, as its fellow. Both rolled out of the gutter together, and in truth I was very glad to get rid of them. The bar was now 4 inches and a half deep in my neck, and there was only a little bit of skin to cut through. My sensations were those of entire happiness, for I felt that in a few minutes, at farthest, I should be relieved from my disagreeable situation. And in this expectation I was not at all deceived. At 25 minutes past 5 in the afternoon, precisely, the huge minute hand had proceeded sufficiently far on its terrible revolution to sever the small remainder of my neck. I was not sorry to see the head, which had occasioned me so much embarrassment, at length make a final separation from my body. It first rolled down the side of the steeple, then lodged, for a few seconds, in the gutter, and then made its way, with a plunge, into the middle of the street. I will candidly confess that my feelings were now of the most singular, nay, of the most mysterious, the most perplexing and incomprehensible character. My senses were here and there at one and the same moment. With my head I imagined, at one time, that I, the head, was the real Signora Psyche Zenobia; at another I felt convinced that myself, the body, was the proper identity. To clear my ideas on this topic I felt in my pocket for my snuff box, but, upon getting it, and endeavoring to apply a pinch of its grateful contents in the ordinary manner, I became immediately aware of my peculiar deficiency, and threw the box at once down to my head. It took a pinch with great satisfaction, and smiled me an acknowledgment in return. Shortly afterward it made me a speech, which I could hear but indistinctly without ears. I gathered enough, however, to know that it was astonished at my wishing to remain alive under such circumstances. In the concluding sentences it quoted the noble words of Ariosto 11 Pover amici non sera cortei and have a combattenti eri morti, thus comparing me to the hero who, in the heat of the combat, not perceiving that he was dead, continued to contest the battle with inextinguishable valor. There was nothing now to prevent my getting down from my elevation, and I did so. What it was that Pompey saw so very peculiar in my appearance I have never yet been able to find out. The fellow opened his mouth from ear to ear, and shut his two eyes as if he were endeavoring to crack nuts between the lids. Finally, throwing off his overcoat, he made one spring for the staircase and disappeared. I hurled after the scoundrel these vehement words of Demosthenes Andrew O Phlegethon, "You really make haste to fly." And then turned to the darling of my heart, to the one-eyed eye, the shaggy-haired Diana. Alas! What a horrible vision affronted my eyes! Was that a rat I saw skulking into his hole? Are these the picked bones of the little angel who has been cruelly devoured by the monster? Ye gods! And what do I behold is that the departed spirit, the shade, the ghost of my beloved puppy, which I perceive sitting with a grace so melancholy, in the corner? Hearken! For she speaks, and, heavens! It is in the German of Schiller und stubby duck, so stubby dun duck she. Duck she. 353 A predicament, alas! And are not her words too true? And if I died, at least I died for thee, for thee. Sweet creature! She too has sacrificed herself in my behalf. Dogless, niggerless, headless, what now remains for the unhappy Signora Psyche Zenobia? Alas, nothing. I have done. Slid, if these be your passados and montantes, I'll have none of them. Ned Knowles, the Baron Ritzner von Jung, was of a noble Hungarian family, every member of which, at least as far back into antiquity as any certain records extend, was more or less remarkable for talent of some description. The majority for that species of grotesquerie in conception of which Tieck, a scion of the house, has given a vivid, although by no means the most vivid exemplification. My acquaintance with Ritzner commenced at the magnificent Chateau Jung, into which a train of droll adventures, not to be made public, threw me during the summer months of the year I ate. Here it was that I obtained a place in his regard, and here, with somewhat more difficulty, a partial insight into his mental conformation. In later days this insight grew more clear, as the intimacy which had at first permitted it became more close, and when, after 3 years' separation, we met at Gn. I knew all that it was necessary to know of the character of the Baron Ritzner von Jung. I remember the buzz of curiosity which his advent excited within the college precincts on the night of the 25th of June. I remember still more distinctly, that while he was pronounced by all parties at first sight the most remarkable man in the world, no person made any attempt at accounting for his opinion. That he was unique appeared so undeniable, that it was deemed impertinent to inquire wherein the uniquity consisted. But, letting this matter pass for the present, I will merely observe that, from the first moment of his setting foot within the limits of the university, he began to exercise over the habits, manners, persons, purses, and cities of the whole community which surrounded him, an influence the most extensive and despotic, yet at the same time the most indefinite and altogether unaccountable. Thus the brief period of his residence at the university forms an era in its annals, and is characterized by all classes of people appertaining to it or its dependencies as that very extraordinary epoch forming the domination of the Baron Ritzner von Jung. Upon his advent to Gn, he sought me out in my apartments. He was then of no particular age, by which I mean that it was impossible to form a guess respecting his age by any data personally afforded. He might have been 15 or 50, and was 21 years and 7 months. He was by no means a handsome man, perhaps the reverse. The contour of 355, his face was somewhat angular and harsh. His forehead was lofty and very fair, his nose a snub, his eyes large, heavy, glassy, and meaningless. About the mouth there was more to be observed. The lips were gently protruded, and rested the one upon the other, after such fashion that it is impossible to conceive any, even the most complex, combination of features, conveying so entirely, and so singly, the idea of unmitigated gravity, solemnity, and repose. It will be perceived, no doubt, from what I have already said, that the Baron was one of those human anomalies now and then to be found, who make the science of mystification the study and the business of their lives. For this science a peculiar turn of mind gave him instinctively the cue, while his physical appearance afforded him unusual facilities for carrying his projects into effect. I firmly believe that no student at Gn, during that renowned epoch so quaintly termed the domination of the Baron Ritzner von Jung, ever rightly entered into the mystery which overshadowed his character. I truly think that no person at the university, with the exception of myself, ever suspected him to be capable of a joke, verbal or practical. The old bulldog at the garden gate would sooner have been accused, the ghost of Heraclitus, or the wig of the emeritus professor of theology. This, too, when it was evident that the most egregious and unpardonable of all conceivable tricks, whimsicalities and buffooneries were brought about, if not directly by him, at least plainly through his intermediate agency or connivance. The beauty, if I may so call it, of his art mystific, lay in that consummate ability, resulting from an almost intuitive knowledge of human nature, and a most wonderful self-possession, by means of which he never failed to make it appear that the drolleries he was occupied in bringing to a point, arose partly in spite, and partly in consequence of the laudable efforts he was making for their prevention, and for the preservation of the good order and dignity of alma mater. The deep, the poignant, the overwhelming mortification, which upon each such failure of his praiseworthy endeavors, would suffuse every lineament of his countenance, left not the slightest room for doubt of his sincerity in the bosoms of even his most skeptical companions. The adroitness, too, was no less worthy of observation by which he contrived to shift the sense of the grotesque from the creator to the created, from his own person to the absurdities to which he had given rise. In no instance before that of which I speak, have I known the habitual mystific escape the natural consequence of his maneuvers and attachment of the ludicrous to his own character and person. Continually developed in an atmosphere of whim, my friend appeared to live only for the severities of society, and not even his own household have for a moment associated other ideas than those of the rigid and august with the memory of the Baron Ritzner von Jung. During the epoch of his residence at Gn it really appeared that the demon of the dolce far niente lay like an incubus upon the university. Nothing, at least, was done beyond eating and drinking and making merry. The apartments of the students were converted into so many pothouses, and there was no pothouse of them all more famous or more frequented than that of the Baron. Our carousals here were many, and boisterous, and long, and never unfruitful of events. Upon one occasion we had protracted our sitting until nearly daybreak, and an unusual quantity of wine had been drunk. The company consisted of 7 or 8 individuals besides the Baron and myself. Most of these were young men of wealth, of high connection, of great family pride, and all alive with an exaggerated sense of honor. They abounded in the most ultra-German opinions respecting the duello. To these quixotic notions some recent Parisian publications, backed by 3 or 4 desperate and fatal rencontres at Gn, had given new vigor and impulse, and thus the conversation, during the greater part of the night, had run wild upon the all-engrossing topic of the times. The Baron, who had been unusually silent and abstracted in the earlier portion of the evening, at length seemed to be aroused from his apathy, took a leading part in the discourse, and dwelt upon the benefits, and more especially upon the beauties, of the received code of etiquette in passages of arms with an ardor, an eloquence, an impressiveness, and an affectionateness of manner, which elicited the warmest enthusiasm from his hearers in general, and absolutely staggered even myself, who well knew him to be at heart a ridiculer of those very points for which he contended, and especially to hold the entire fanfaro native dueling etiquette in the sovereign contempt which it deserves. Looking around me during a pause in the Baron's discourse, of which my readers may gather some faint idea when I say that it bore resemblance to the fervid, chanting, monotonous, yet musical, sermonic manner of Coleridge, I perceived symptoms of even more than the general interest in the countenance of one of the party. This gentleman, whom I shall call Hermann, was an original in every respect except, perhaps, in the single particular that he was a very great fool. He contrived to bear, however, among a particular set at the university, a reputation for deep metaphysical thinking, and, I believe, for some logical talent. As a duellist he had acquired great renown, even at Gn. I forget the precise number of victims who had fallen at his hands, but they were many. He was a man of courage undoubtedly. But it was upon his minute acquaintance with the etiquette of the duello, and the nicety of his sense of honor, that he most especially prided himself. These things were a hobby which he rode to the death. To Ritzner, ever upon the lookout for the grotesque, his peculiarities had for a long time past afforded food for mystification. Of this, however, I was not aware, although, in the present instance, I saw clearly that something of a whimsical nature was upon the tapis with my friend, and that Hermann was its especial object. As the former proceeded in his discourse, or rather monologue, I perceived the excitement of the latter momently increasing. At length he spoke, offering some objection to a point insisted upon by R, and giving his reasons in detail. To these the Baron replied at length, still maintaining his exaggerated tone of sentiment, and concluding, in what I thought very bad taste, with a sarcasm and a sneer. The hobby of Hermann now took the bit in his teeth. This I could discern by the studied hair-splitting jargo of his rejoinder. His last words I distinctly remember. Your opinions, allow me to say, Baron von Jung, although in the main correct, are, in many nice points, discreditable to yourself and to the university of which you are a member. In a few respects they are even unworthy of serious refutation. I would say more than this, sir, were it not for the fear of giving you offense. Here the speaker smiled blandly. I would say, sir, that your opinions are not the opinions to be expected from a gentleman. As Hermann completed this equivocal sentence, all eyes were turned upon the Baron. He became pale, then excessively red, then, dropping his pocket handkerchief, stooped to recover it, when I caught a glimpse of his countenance, while it could be seen by no one else at the table. It was radiant with the quizzical expression which was its natural character, but which I had never seen it assume except when we were alone together, and when he unbent himself freely. In an instant afterward he stood erect, confronting Hermann, and so total an alteration of countenance in so short a period I certainly never saw before. For a moment I even fancied that I had misconceived him, and that he was in sober earnest. He appeared to be stifling with passion, and his face was cadaverously white. For a short time he remained silent, apparently striving to master his emotion. Having at length seemingly succeeded, he reached a decanter which stood near him, saying as he held it firmly clenched, "The language you have thought proper to employ, Mynheer Hermann, in addressing yourself to me, is objectionable in so many particulars, that I have neither temper nor time for specification. That my opinions, however, are not the opinions to be expected from a gentleman, is an observation so directly offensive as to allow me but one line of conduct. Some courtesy, nevertheless, is due to the presence of this company, and to yourself, at this moment, as my guest. You will pardon me, therefore, if, upon this consideration, I deviate slightly from the general usage among gentlemen in similar cases of personal affront. You will forgive me for the moderate tax I shall make upon your imagination, and endeavor to consider, for an instant, the reflection of your person in yonder mirror as the living Mynheer Hermann himself. This being done, there will be no difficulty whatever. I shall discharge this decanter of wine at your image in yonder mirror, and thus fulfill all the spirit, if not the exact letter, of resentment for your insult, while the necessity of physical violence to your real person will be obviated." With these words he hurled the decanter, full of wine, against the mirror which hung directly opposite Hermann, striking the reflection of his person with great precision, and of course shattering the glass into fragments. The whole company at once started to their feet, and, with the exception of myself and Ritzner, took their departure. As Hermann went out, the Baron whispered me that I should follow him and make an offer of my services. To this I agreed, not knowing precisely what to make of so ridiculous a piece of business. The duellist accepted my aid with his stiff and ultra-recherché air, and, taking my arm, led me to his apartment. I could hardly forbear laughing in his face while he proceeded to discuss, with the profoundest gravity, what he termed the refinedly peculiar character of the insult he had received. After a tiresome harangue in his ordinary style, he took down from his bookshelves a number of musty volumes on the subject of the duello, and entertained me for a long time with their contents, reading aloud, and commenting earnestly as he read. I can just remember the titles of some of the works. There were the Ordonnance of Philip Le Bel on Single Combat, the Theatre of Honor, by Favin, and a treatise on the Permission of Duels, by Andy Geyer. He displayed, also, with much pomposity, Brantôme's Memoirs of Duels, published at Cologne, 1666, in the types of Elsevier, a precious and unique vellum paper volume, with a fine margin, and bound by Jerome. But he requested my attention particularly, and with an air of mysterious sagacity, to a thick octavo, written in barbarous Latin by one Hidelin, a Frenchman, and having the quaint title, Duelli Lex Scripta, et non, a liturg J. From this he read me one of the drollest chapters in the world concerning injurispor applicationem, per constructionem, et per se/ about half of which, he averred, was strictly applicable to his own refinedly peculiar case, although not one syllable of the whole matter could I understand for the life of me. Having finished the chapter, he closed the book, and demanded what I thought necessary to be done. I replied that I had entire confidence in his superior delicacy of feeling, and would abide by what he proposed. With this answer he seemed flattered, and sat down to write a note to the Baron. It ran thus: "Sir, my friend, MP, will hand you this note. I find it incumbent upon me to request, at your earliest convenience, an explanation of this evening's occurrences at your chambers. In the event of your declining this request, Mr. P. will be happy to arrange, with any friend whom you may appoint, the steps preliminary to a meeting. 3s9 With sentiments of perfect respect, your most humble servant, Johann Hermann the Baron Ritzner VCN Jung, August LA, 1-8 Not knowing what better to do, I called upon Ritzner with this epistle. He bowed as I presented it, then, with a grave countenance, motioned me to a seat. Having perused the cartel, he wrote the following reply, which I carried to Hermann. Sir, through our common friend, Mr. P., I have received your note of this evening. Upon due reflection, I frankly admit the propriety of the explanation you suggest. This being admitted, I still find great difficulty, owing to the refinedly peculiar nature of our disagreement, and of the personal affront offered on my part, in so wording what I have to say by way of apology, as to meet all the minute exigencies, and all the variable shadows of the case. I have great reliance, however, on that extreme delicacy of discrimination, in matters appertaining to the rules of etiquette, for which you have been so long and so preeminently distinguished. With perfect certainty, therefore, of being comprehended, I beg leave, in lieu of offering any sentiments of my own, to refer you to the opinions of the Sieur Hidelin, as set forth in the 9th paragraph of the chapter of 7 Uggerito per applicationem, per constructionem, et per se/ in his duelli lex. Scripta, et non, aliturc J. The nicety of your discernment in all the matters here treated, will be sufficient, I am assured, to convince you that the mere circumstance of me referring you to this admirable passage, ought to satisfy your request, as a man of honor, for explanation. With sentiments of profound respect, your most obedient servant, von Jung the Herr Johann Hermann, August I percent th. 1-8 Hermann commenced the perusal of this epistle with a scowl, which, however, was converted into a smile of the most ludicrous self-complacency as he came to the rigmarole about injurium per applicationem, per constructionem, et per se. Having finished reading, he begged me, with the blandest of all possible smiles, to be seated, while he made reference to the treatise in question. Turning to the passage specified, he read it with great care to himself, then closed the book, and desired me, in my character of confidential acquaintance, to express to the Baron von Jung his exalted sense of his chivalrous behavior, and, in that of second, to assure him that the explanation offered was of the fullest, the most honorable, and the most unequivocally satisfactory nature. Somewhat amazed at all this, I made my retreat to the Baron. He seemed to receive Hermann's amicable letter as a matter of course, and after a few words of general conversation, went to an inner room and brought out the everlasting treatise Duelli Lex Scripta et non, aliturc. He handed me the volume and asked me to look over some portion of it. I did so, but to little purpose, not being able to gather the least particle of meaning. He then took the book himself, and read me a chapter aloud. To my surprise, what he read proved to be a most horribly absurd account of a duel between two baboons. He now explained the mystery, showing that the volume, as it appeared prima facie, was written upon the plan of the nonsense verses of Du Bartas, that is to say, the language was ingeniously framed so as to present to the ear all the outward signs of intelligibility, and even of profundity, while in fact not a shadow of meaning existed. The key to the whole was found in leaving out every second and third word alternately, when there appeared a series of ludicrous quizzes upon a single combat as practiced in modern times. The Baron afterwards informed me that he had purposely thrown the treatise in Hermann's way 2 or 3 weeks before the adventure, and that he was satisfied, from the general tenor of his conversation, that he had studied it with the deepest attention, and firmly believed it to be a work of unusual merit. Upon this hint he proceeded. Hermann would have died 1,000 deaths rather than acknowledge his inability to understand anything and everything in the universe that had ever been written about the duello. As it is well known that the wise men came from the East, and as Mr. Touch and Go Bullethead came from the East, it follows that Mr. Bullethead was a wise man, and if collateral proof of the matter be needed, here we have it. Mr. B was an editor. Irascibility was his sole foible, for in fact the obstinacy of which men accused him was anything but his foible, since he justly considered it his forte. It was his strong point, his virtue, and it would have required all the logic of a Brownson to convince him that it was anything else. I have shown that Touch and Go Bullethead was a wise man, and the only occasion on which he did not prove infallible was when, abandoning that legitimate home for all wise men, the East, he migrated to the city of Alexander the Great o Napoles, or some place of a similar title, out west. I must do him the justice to say, however, that when he made up his mind finally to settle in that town, it was under the impression that no newspaper, and consequently no editor, existed in that particular section of the country. In establishing the teapot he expected to have the field all to himself. I feel confident he never would have dreamed of taking up his residence in Alexander the Great o Napoles had he been aware that, in Alexander the Great o Napoles, there lived a gentleman named John Smith, if I rightly remember, who for many years had there quietly grown fat in editing and publishing the Alexander the Great o Napoles Gazette. It was solely, therefore, on account of having been misinformed, that Mr. Bullethead found himself in Alex, suppose we call it Napoles, for short, but, as he did find himself there, he determined to keep up his character for obst for fearn mess, and remain. So remain he did, and he did more, he unpacked his press, type, etc., etc., rented an office exactly opposite to that of the Gazette, and, on the third morning after his arrival, issued the first number of the election, that is to say, of the Napoles Teapot. As nearly as I can recollect, this was the name of the new paper. The leading article, I must admit, was brilliant, not to say severe. It was especially bitter about things in general, and as for the editor of the Gazette, he was torn all to pieces in particular. Some of Bullethead's remarks were really so fiery that I have always, since that time, been forced to look upon John Smith, who is still alive, in the light of a salamander. I cannot pretend to give all the Teapot's paragraphs verbatim, but one of them runs thus. Oh, yes. Oh, we perceive. Oh, no doubt. The editor over the way is a genius. Oh, my. Oh, goodness, gracious. What is this world coming to? Oh, temporal, oh, Moses. A philippic at once so caustic and so classical, alighted like a bombshell among the hitherto peaceful citizens of Napoles. Groups of excited individuals gathered at the corners of the streets. Every one awaited, with heartfelt anxiety, the reply of the dignified Smith. Next morning it appeared as follows. We quote from the Teapot of yesterday the subjoined paragraph. Oh, yes. Oh, we perceive. Oh, no doubt. Oh, my. Oh, goodness. Oh, temporal, oh, Moses. Why asterisk the fellow is all oh. That accounts for his reasoning in a circle, and explains why there is neither beginning nor end to him, nor to anything he says. We really do not believe the vagabond can write a word that has nt and o in it. Wonder if this zeroing is a habit of his? By the by, he came away from down east in a great hurry. Wonder if he owes as much there as he does here? Oh! It is pitiful. The indignation of Mr. Bullethead at these scandalous insinuations, I shall not attempt to describe. On the eel-skinning principle, however, he did not seem to be so much incensed at the attack upon his integrity as one might have imagined. It was the sneer at his style that drove him to desperation. What? He, Touch and Go Bullethead. Not able to write a word without an zero in it. He would soon let the jackanapes see that he was mistaken. Yes. He would let him see how much he was mistaken, the puppy. He, Touch and Go Bullethead, of Frogpondium, would let Mr. John Smith perceive that he, Bullethead, could indict, if it so pleased him, a whole paragraph, a whole article in which that contemptible vowel should not even once make its appearance. But no, that would be yielding a point to the said John Smith. He, Bullethead, would make no alteration in his style, to suit the caprices of any Mr. Smith in Christendom. Perish so vile a thought. The zero forever. He would persist in the He would be as 0wy as 0wy could be. Burning with the chivalry of this determination, the great Touch and Go, in the next teapot, came out merely with this simple but resolute paragraph: in reference to this unhappy affair, the editor of the teapot has the honor of advising the editor of the Gazette that he, the teapot, will take an opportunity in tomorrow morning's paper, of convincing him, the Gazette, that he, the teapot, both can and will be his own master, as regards style, he, the teapot, intending to show him, the Gazette, the supreme, and indeed the withering contempt with which the criticism of him, the Gazette, inspires the independent bosom of him, the teapot, by composing for the especial gratification of him, the Gazette, a leading article, of some extent, in which the beautiful vowel, the emblem of eternity yet so offensive to the hyper-exquisite delicacy of him, the Gazette, shall most certainly not be avoided by his, the Gazette's, most obedient, humble servant, the teapot. So much for Buckingham. In fulfillment of the awful threat, thus darkly intimated rather than decidedly enunciated, the great bullet head turning a deaf ear to all entreaties for copy, and simply requesting his foreman to go to the D1, when he, the foreman, assured him, the teapot, that it was high time to go to press, turning a deaf ear to everything, I say, the great bullet head sat up until daybreak, consuming the midnight oil, and absorbed in the composition of the really unparalleled paragraph, which follows: "So ho, John, how now? Told you so, you know. Don't crow, another time, before you're out of the woods. Does your mother know you're out? Oh, no, no. So go home at once, now, John, to your odious old woods of Concord. Go home to your woods, old owl, go. You won't? Oh, Poe, John, don't do so. You've got to go, you know. So go at once, and don't go slow, for nobody owns you here, you know. Oh, John, if you don't go you're no homo, no. You're only a fowl, an owl, a cow, a sow, a doll, a pole, a poor, old, good for nothing to nobody, log, dog, hog, or frog, come out of a Concord bog. Cool, now cool. Do be cool, you fool. None of your crowing, old cock. Don't frown so, don't. Don't hollow, nor howl, nor growl, nor bow wow wow. Good Lord, John, how you do look. Told you so, you know, but stop rolling your goose of an old pole about so, and go and drown your sorrows in a bowl." Exhausted, very naturally, by so stupendous an effort, the great Touch and Go could attend to nothing farther that night. Firmly, composedly, yet with an air of conscious power, he handed his MS to the devil in waiting, and then, walking leisurely home, retired, with ineffable dignity, to bed. Meantime the devil, to whom the copy was entrusted, ran upstairs to his case, in an unutterable hurry, and forthwith made a commencement at setting the MS up. In the first place, of course, as the opening word was so, he made a plunge into the capital S hole and came out in triumph with a capital S. Elated by the success, he immediately threw himself upon the little O box with a blindfold impetuosity, but who shall describe his horror when his fingers came up without the anticipated letter in their clutch? Who shall paint his astonishment and rage at perceiving, as he rubbed his knuckles, that he had been only thumping them to no purpose, against the bottom of an empty box? Not a single little. Awe-stricken, his first impulse was to rush to the foreman. "Sir," said he, gasping for breath, "I can't never set up nothing without no O's." "What do you mean by that?" growled the foreman, who was in a very ill humor at being kept up so late. "Why, sir, there bean't an zero in the office, neither a big un nor a little un. What the D1 has become of all that were in the case?" "Don't know, sir," said the boy, "but one of them air Gazette devils is been prowling 'bout here all night, and I 'spect he 'es gone and cabbaged 'em. Every one. Dod rot him." "I haven't a doubt of it," replied the foreman, getting purple with rage. But I tell you what you do. Bob, that's a good boy. You go over the first chance you get and hook every one of their eyes and DN them, their izzards. Just so, replied Bob, with a wink and a frown. Be into FLL, let know a thing or two, but in the meantime, that air paragrab. Musgo. In tonight, you know, else there'll be the D1 to pay, and not a bit of pitch hot, interrupted the foreman, with a deep sigh, and an emphasis on the bit. Is it a very long paragraph? Bob. Shouldn't call it a very long paragraph, said Bob. Ah, well, then. Do the best you can with it. One we must get to press, said the foreman, who was over head and ears in work. Just stick in some other letter for 0, nobody's going to read the fellow's trash anyhow. Very well, replied Bob, here goes it. And off he hurried to his case, muttering as he went, considerable vale, them air expressions, particular for a man as doesn't swore. So I's to gouge out all their eyes, and DN all their gizzards. Vale. This here's the chap as is just able for to do it. The fact is that although Bob was but 12 years old and 4 feet high, he was equal to any amount of fight, in a small way. The exigency here described is by no means of rare occurrence in printing offices, and I cannot tell how to account for it, but the fact is indisputable, that when the exigency does occur, it almost always happens that % is adopted as a substitute for the letter deficient. The true reason, perhaps, is that X is rather the most superabundant letter in the cases, or at least was so in the old times long enough to render the substitution in question an habitual thing with printers. As for Bob, he would have considered it heretical to employ any other character, in a case of this kind, than the X to which he had been accustomed. I shall have to X this air paragraph, said he to himself, as he read it over in astonishment, but it's just about the awfulest OWY paragraph I ever did see, so X it he did, unflinchingly, and to press it went X ed. Next morning the population of Napoles were taken all aback by reading in the teapot, the following extraordinary leader. SXHX, JXHNLKXWNXW. TXLDXUSX, XOKNXW. DXNTCRXW, Anx third time, Befexerixuri sut XF the WXXDS. XXXURMXTHER HNTWXURI sut. XH, NX, NXLSXGXHXME at XNCE, NXW, JXHN, TXXUR Stigsus XLDWXXDSXFCXNCXRDIGXHXME TXXUR WXXDS, XLDXWLGX, XUWXNT, XH, PXH, JXHN, DXNT DXSX, XOVEGXTTXGX, SXGX at XNCE, and DXNTGXSLXW, FXRNXBXDYXWNS here, XOKNXW. XH, JXHN, JXHN, if XUXVHGXXURI NXHXMXNX. XURI XNLY FXWL, an XWL, a CXW, a SXW, a DXLL, a PXLL, a PXXRXLDGXXDFXRNXTXNXBXDY, IXC, DXG, HXG, XRFRXG, CXME SUT XF a CXNCXRDBXG. CXXL, NXWCXXL. DXBCXXL, XUFXXL. XNIXFXURCRXWing, XLDXKI DXNTFRXWNSXDXNT. DXNTHXLLX, NXRHXWL, NXRGRXWL, NXRBXWWXWWXW. GXXDLXRD, JXHN, HXWXUDXISC. TXLD XUSX, XOKNXW but STXPRXLing XUR GXXSEXF and XLDPXLL ABXUT SX and GX and DRXWN XUR SXRRXWS in a BXVDL. The uproar occasioned by this mystical and Kabbalistical article is not to be conceived. The first definite idea entertained by the populace was that some diabolical treason lay concealed in the hieroglyphics, and there was a general rush to Bullethead's residence, for the purpose of riding him on a rail, but that gentleman was nowhere to be found. He had vanished, no one could tell how, and not even the ghost of him has ever been seen since. Unable to discover its legitimate object, the popular fury at length subsided, leaving behind it, by way of sediment, quite a medley of opinion about this unhappy affair. One gentleman thought the whole an excellent joke. Another said that, indeed, Bullethead had shown much exuberance of fancy. A third admitted him eccentric, but no more. A fourth could only suppose it the Yankees' design to express, in a general way, his exasperation. Say, rather, to set an example to posterity, suggested a fifth. That Bullethead had been driven to an extremity, was clear to all, and in fact, since that editor could not be found, there was some talk about lynching the other one. The more common conclusion, however, was that the affair was, simply, extraordinary and inexplicable. Even the town mathematician confessed that he could make nothing of so dark a problem. X, everybody knew, was an unknown quantity, but in this case, as he properly observed, there was an unknown quantity of X. The opinion of Bob, the devil, who kept dark about his having X'd the paragraph, did not meet with so much attention as I think it deserved, although it was very openly and very fearlessly expressed. He said that, for his part, he had no doubt about the matter at all, that it was a clear case, that Mr. Bullethead never could be persuaded for to drink like other folks, but vas continually asviging o that air blessed XXX ale, and, as a natural consequence, it just puffed him up savage, and made him cross, in the extreme. Considered as one of the exact sciences, hey, diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle. Since the world began there have been two Jeremies. The one wrote a Jeremiad about usury, and was called Jeremy Bentham. He has been much admired by Mr. John Neal, and was a great man in a small way. The other gave name to the most important of the exact sciences, and was a great man in a great way, I may say, indeed, in the very greatest of ways. Diddling, or the abstract idea conveyed by the verb to diddle, is sufficiently well understood. Yet the fact, the deed, the thing, diddling, is somewhat difficult to define. We may get, however, at a tolerably distinct conception of the matter in hand, by defining not the thing, diddling, in itself but man, as an animal that diddles. Had Plato but hit upon this, he would have been spared the affront of the picked chicken. Very pertinently it was demanded of Plato, why a picked chicken, which was clearly a biped without feathers, was not, according to his own definition, a man? But I am not to be bothered by any similar query. Man is an animal that diddles, and there is no animal that diddles but man. It will take an entire hen coop of picked chickens to get over that. What constitutes the essence, the nair, the principle of diddling is, in fact, peculiar to the class of creatures that wear coats and pantaloons. A crow thieves, a fox cheats, a weasel outweets, a man diddles. To diddle is his destiny. Man was made to mourn, says the poet. But not so, he was made to diddle. This is his aim, his object, his end. And for this reason when a man's diddled we say he's done. Diddling, rightly considered, is a compound, of which the ingredients are minuteness, interest, perseverance, ingenuity, audacity, nonchalance, originality, impertinence, and grin. Minuteness, your diddler is minute. His operations are upon a small scale. His business is retail, for cash, or approved paper at sight. Should he ever be tempted into magnificent speculation, he then, at once, loses his distinctive features, and becomes what we term financier. This latter word conveys the diddling idea in every respect except that of magnitude. A diddler may thus be regarded as a banker in petto a financial operation, as a diddle at Brobdingnagian. The one is to the other, as Homer to Trachis, as a mastodon to a mouse, as the tail of a comet to that of a pig. Interest, your diddler is guided by self-interest. He scorns to diddle for the mere sake of the diddle. He has an object in view, his pocket and yours. He regards always the main chance. He looks to number one. You are number two, and must look to yourself. Perseverance, your diddler perseveres. He is not readily discouraged. Should even the banks break, he cares nothing about it. He steadily pursues his end, and vt cams acorio nunquam absterebitur undu, so he lets go of his game. Ingenuity, your diddler is ingenious. He has constructiveness large. He understands plot. He invents and circumvents. Were he not Alexander, he would be Diogenes. Were he not a diddler, he would be a maker of patent rat traps or an angler for trout. Audacity, your diddler is audacious. He is a bold man. He carries the war into Africa. He conquers all by assault. He would not fear the daggers of Fray Heron. With a little more prudence Dick Turpin would have made a good diddler, with a trifle less blarney, Daniel O'Connell, with a pound or two more brains, Charles XII. Nonchalance, your diddler is nonchalant. He is not at all nervous. He never had any nerves. He is never seduced into a flurry. He is never put out unless put out of doors. He is cool as a cucumber. He is calm as a smile from Lady Berry. He is easy as an old glove, or the damsels of ancient Baia. Originality, your diddler is original, conscientiously so. His thoughts are his own. He would scorn to employ those of another. A stale trick is his aversion. He would return a purse, I am sure, upon discovering that he had obtained it by an unoriginal diddle. Impertinence, your diddler is impertinent. He swaggers. He sets his arms akimbo. He thrusts his hands in his trousers pocket. He sneers in your face. He treads on your corns. He eats your dinner, he drinks your wine, he borrows your money, he pulls your nose, he kicks your poodle, and he kisses your wife. Grin, your true diddler winds up all with a grin. But this nobody sees but himself. He grins when his daily work is done, when his allotted labors are accomplished at night in his own closet, and altogether for his own private entertainment. He goes home. He locks his door. He divests himself of his clothes. He puts out his candle. He gets into bed. He places his head upon the pillow. All this done, and your diddler grins. This is no hypothesis. It is a matter of course. I reason a priori, and a diddle would be no diddle without a grin. The origin of the diddle is referable to the infancy of the human race. Perhaps the first diddler was Adam. At all events, we can trace the science back to a very remote period of antiquity. The moderns, however, have brought it to a perfection never dreamed of by our thick-headed progenitors. Without pausing to speak of the old saws, therefore, I shall content myself with a compendious account of some of the more modern instances. A very good diddle is this. A housekeeper in want of a sofa, for instance, is seen to go in and out of several cabinet warehouses. At length she arrives at one offering an excellent variety. She is accosted, and invited to enter, by a polite and voluble individual at the door. She finds a sofa well adapted to her views, and upon inquiring the price, is surprised and delighted to hear a sum named at least 20%, lower than her expectations. She hastens to make the purchase, gets a bill and receipt, leaves her address, with a request that the article be sent home as speedily as possible, and retires amid a profusion of bows from the shopkeeper. The night arrives and no sofa. The next day passes, and still none. A servant is sent to make inquiry about the delay. The whole transaction is denied. No sofa has been sold, no money received except by the diddler, who played shopkeeper for the nonce. Our cabinet warehouses are left entirely unattended, and thus afford every facility for a trick of this kind. Visitors enter, look at furniture, and depart unheeded and unseen. Should anyone wish to purchase, or to inquire the price of an article, a bell is at hand, and this is considered amply sufficient. Again, quite a respectable diddle is this. A well-dressed individual enters a shop, makes a purchase to the value of $1, finds, much to his vexation, that he has left his pocketbook in another coat pocket, and so says to the shopkeeper, "My dear sir, never mind. Just oblige me, will you, by sending the bundle home? But stay. I really believe that I have nothing less than a $5 bill, even there. However, you can send $4 in change with the bundle, you know." "Very good, sir," replies the shopkeeper, who entertains, at once, a lofty opinion of the high-mindedness of his customer. "I know fellows," he says to himself, "who would just have put the goods under their arm, and walked off with a promise to call and pay the $1 as they came by in the afternoon. A boy is sent with the parcel and change. On the route, quite accidentally, he is met by the purchaser, who exclaims, 'Ah, this is my bundle, I see. I thought you had been home with it, long ago.' 'Well, go on. My wife, Mrs. Trotter, will give you the $5 I left instructions with her to that effect. The change you might as well give to me. I shall want some silver for the post office.' 'Very good. 1, 2, is this a good quarter? 3, 4, quite right? Say to Mrs. Trotter that you met me, and be sure now and do not loiter on the way.' The boy doesn't loiter at all, but he is a very long time in getting back from his errand, for no lady of the precise name of Mrs. Trotter is to be discovered. He consoles himself, however, that he has not been such a fool as to leave the goods without the money, and re-entering his shop with a self-satisfied air, feels sensibly hurt and indignant when his master asks him what has become of the change. A very simple diddle, indeed, is this. The captain of a ship which is about to sail, is presented by an official-looking person with an unusually moderate bill of city charges. Glad to get off so easily, and confused by 100 duties pressing upon him all at once, he discharges the claim forthwith. In about 15 minutes, another and less reasonable bill is handed him by one who soon makes it evident that the first collector was a diddler, and the original collection a diddle. And here, too, is a somewhat similar thing. A steamboat is casting loose from the wharf. A traveler, portmanteau in hand, is discovered running toward the wharf, at full speed. Suddenly, he makes a dead halt, stoops, and picks up something from the ground in a very agitated manner. It is a pocket book, and has any gentleman lost a pocket book, he cries. No one can say that he has exactly lost a pocket book, but a great excitement ensues, when the treasure trove is found to be of value. The boat, however, must not be detained. "Time and tide wait for no man," says the captain. "For God's sake, stay only a few minutes," says the finder of the book. "The true claimant will presently appear." "Can't wait," replies the man in authority. "Cast off there, d'ye hear?" "What am I to do?" asks the finder, in great tribulation. "I am about to leave the country for some years, and I cannot conscientiously retain this large amount in my possession. I beg your pardon, sir," here he addresses a gentleman on shore, "but you have the air of an honest man. Will you confer upon me the favor of taking charge of this pocketbook? I know I can trust you, and of advertising it. The notes, you see, amount to a very considerable sum. The owner will, no doubt, insist upon rewarding you for your trouble. No, it was you who found the book. Well, if you must have it so, you take a small reward just to satisfy your scruples. Let me see why these notes are all hundreds. Bless my soul, a 100 is too much to take. 50 would be quite enough. I am sure cast off there, says the captain. But then I have no change for 100, and upon the whole, you had better cast off there, says the captain. Never mind, cries the gentleman on shore, who has been examining his own pocketbook for the last minute or so. Never mind. One can fix it. Here is a 50 on the Bank of North America, throw me the book. And the overconscientious finder takes the 50 with marked reluctance, and throws the gentleman the book, as desired, while the steamboat fumes and fizzes on her way. In about half an hour after her departure, the large amount is seen to be a counterfeit presentment, and the whole thing a capital diddle. A bold diddle is this. A camp meeting, or something similar, is to be held at a certain spot which is accessible only by means of a free bridge. A diddle stations himself upon this bridge, respectfully informs all passers-by of the new county law, which establishes a toll of 1 cent for foot passengers, 2 for horses and donkeys, and so forth, and so forth. Some grumble but all submit, and the diddler goes home a wealthier man by some $50 or $60 well earned. This taking a toll from a great crowd of people is an excessively troublesome thing. A neat diddle is this. A friend holds one of the diddler's promises to pay, filled up and signed in due form, upon the ordinary blanks printed in red ink. The diddler purchases 1 or 2 dozen of these blanks, and every day dips one of them in his soup, makes his dog jump for it, and finally gives it to him as a bonne bouche. The note arriving at maturity, the diddler, with the diddler's dog, calls upon the friend, and the promise to pay is made the topic of discussion. The friend produces it from his escritoire, and is in the act of reaching it to the diddler, when up jumps the diddler's dog and devours it forthwith. The diddler is not only surprised but vexed and incensed at the absurd behavior of his dog, and expresses his entire readiness to cancel the obligation at any moment when the evidence of the obligation shall be forthcoming. A very minute diddle is this. A lady is insulted in the street by a diddler's accomplice. The diddler himself flies to her assistance, and, giving his friend a comfortable thrashing, insists upon attending the lady to her own door. He bows, with his hand upon his heart, and most respectfully bids her adieu. She entreats him, as her deliverer, to walk in and be introduced to her big brother and her papa. With a sigh, he declines to do so. Is there no way, then, sir, she murmurs, in which I may be permitted to testify my gratitude? Why, yes, madam, there is. Will you be kind enough to lend me a couple of shillings? In the first excitement of the moment the lady decides upon fainting outright. Upon second thought, however, she opens her purse strings and delivers the specie. Now this, I say, is a diddle minute, for 1 entire moiety of the sum borrowed has to be paid to the gentleman who had the trouble of performing the insult, and who had then to stand still and be thrashed for performing it. Rather a small, but still a scientific diddle is this. The diddler approaches the bar of a tavern, and demands a couple of twists of tobacco. These are handed to him, when, having slightly examined them, he says, I don't much like this tobacco. Here, take it back, and give me a glass of brandy and water in its place. The brandy and water is furnished and imbibed, and the diddler makes his way to the door. But the voice of the tavern keeper arrests him. I believe, sir, you have forgotten to pay for your brandy and water. Pay for my brandy and water. Didn't I give you the tobacco for the brandy and water? What more would you have? But, sir, if you please, I don't remember that you paid me for the tobacco. What do you mean by that, you scoundrel? Didn't I give you back your tobacco? Isn't that your tobacco lying there? Do you expect me to pay for what I did not take? But, sir, says the publican, now rather at a loss what to say, but sir. But me no buts, sir, interrupts the diddler, apparently in very high dudgeon, and slamming the door after him, as he makes his escape. But me no buts, sir, and none of your tricks upon travellers. Here again is a very clever diddle, of which the simplicity is not its least. Recommendation. A purse, or pocket book, being really lost, the loser inserts in one of the daily papers of a large city a fully descriptive advertisement. Whereupon our diddler copies the facts of this advertisement, with a change of heading, of general phraseology, and address. The original, for instance, is long, and verbose, is headed "A Pocket Book Lost," and requires the treasure, when found, to be left at No. I Tom Street. The copy is brief, and being headed with "Lost" only, indicates number 2 Dick, or No. 3 Harry Street as the locality Indiana which the owner may be seen. Moreover, it is inserted in at least 5 or 6 of the daily papers of the day, while in point of time, it makes its appearance only a few hours after the original. Should it be read by the loser of the purse, he would hardly suspect it to have any reference to his own misfortune. But, of course, the chances are 5 or 6 to 1, that the finder will repair to the address given by the diddler, rather than to that pointed out by the rightful proprietor. The former pays the reward, pockets the treasure and decamps. Quite an analogous diddle is this. A lady of ton has dropped, somewhere in the street, a diamond ring of very unusual value. For its recovery, she offers some $40 or $50 reward, giving, in her advertisement, a very minute description of the gem, and of its settings, and declaring that, on its restoration at No. so and so, in such and such avenue, the reward will be paid instanter, without a single question being asked. During the lady's absence from home, a day or two afterwards, a ring is heard at the door of No. so and so, in such and such avenue, a servant appears, the lady of the house is asked for and is declared to be out, at which astounding information, the visitor expresses the most poignant regret. His business is of importance and concerns the lady herself. In fact, he had the good fortune to find her diamond ring. But perhaps it would be as well that he should call again. By no means, says the servant, and by no means, says the lady's sister and the lady's sister-in-law, who are summoned forthwith. The ring is clamorously identified, the reward is paid, and the finder nearly thrust out of doors. The lady returns and expresses some little dissatisfaction with her sister and sister-in-law, because they happen to have paid $40 or $50 for a facsimile of her diamond ring, a facsimile made out of real pinchbeck and unquestionable paste. But as there is really no end to diddling, so there would be none to this essay, were I even to hint at half the variations, or inflections, of which this science is susceptible. I must bring this paper, perforce, to a conclusion, and this I cannot do better than by a summary notice of a very decent, but rather elaborate diddle, of which our own city was made the theatre, not very long ago, and which was subsequently repeated with success, in other still more verdant localities of the Union. A middle-aged gentleman arrives in town from parts unknown. He is remarkably precise, cautious, staid, and deliberate in his demeanor. His dress is scrupulously neat, but plain, unostentatious. He wears a white cravat, an ample waistcoat, made with an eye to comfort alone, thick-soled cozy-looking shoes, and pantaloons without straps. He has the whole air, in fact, of your well-to-do, sober-sided, exact, and respectable man of business, par excellence one of the stem and outwardly hard, internally soft, sort of people that we see in the crack high comedies, fellows whose words are so many elons, and who are noted for giving away guineas, in charity, with the one hand, while, in the way of mere bargain, they exact the uttermost fraction of a farthing with the other. He makes much ado before he can get suited with a boarding house. He dislikes children. He has been accustomed to quiet. His habits are methodical, and then he would prefer getting into a private and respectable small family, piously inclined. Terms, however, are no object, only he must insist upon settling his bill on the 1st of every month. It is now the 2nd, and begs his landlady, when he finally obtains one to his mind, not on any account to forget his instructions upon this point, but to send in a billy and receipt, precisely at 10 o'clock, on the 1st day of every month, and under no circumstances to put it off to the second. These arrangements made, our man of business rents an office in a reputable rather than a fashionable quarter of the town. There is nothing he more despises than pretense. Where there is much show, he says, there is seldom anything very solid behind, an observation which so profoundly impresses his landlady's fancy, that she makes a pencil memorandum of it forthwith, in her great family Bible, on the broad margin of the Proverbs of Solomon. The next step is to advertise, after some such fashion as this, in the principal business sixpennies of the city. The pennies are eschewed as not respectable and as demanding payment for all advertisements in advance. Our man of business holds it as a point of his faith that work should never be paid for until done. Wanted. The advertisers, being about to commence extensive business operations in the city, will require the services of 3 or 4 intelligent and competent clerks, to whom a liberal salary will be paid. The very best recommendations, not so much for capacity, as for integrity, will be expected. Indeed, as the duties to be performed, involve high responsibilities, and large amounts of money must necessarily pass through the hands of those engaged, it is deemed advisable to demand a deposit of $50 from each clerk employed. No person need apply, therefore, who is not prepared to leave this sum in the possession of the advertisers, and who cannot furnish the most satisfactory testimonials of morality. Young gentlemen piously inclined will be preferred. Application should be made between the hours of 10 and 11 a.m., and 4 and 5 p.m., of Messrs. Boggs, Hoggs, Logs, Frogs, & Co., No. 110 Dog Street. By the 31st day of the month, this advertisement has brought to the office of Messrs. Boggs, Hoggs, Logs, Frogs, and Company, some 15 or 20 young gentlemen piously inclined. But our man of business is in no hurry to conclude a contract with any. No man of business is ever precipitate, and it is not until the most rigid catechism in respect to the piety of each young gentleman's inclination, that his services are engaged and his $50 receipted for, fussed by way of proper precaution, on the part of the respectable firm of Boggs, Hoggs, Logs, Frogs, and Company. On the morning of the first day of the next month, the landlady does not present her bill, according to promise, piece of neglect for which the comfortable head of the house ending in Oggs would no doubt have chided her severely, could he have been prevailed upon to remain in town a day or two for that purpose. As it is, the constables have had a sad time of it, running hither and thither, and all they can do is to declare the man of business most emphatically, a hen knee-high, by which some persons imagine them to imply that, in fact, he is n. ei, by which again the very classical phrase non est inventus, is supposed to be understood. In the meantime the young gentlemen, one and all, are somewhat less piously inclined than before, while the landlady purchases a shilling's worth of the best Indian rubber, and very carefully obliterates the pencil memorandum that some fool has made in her great family Bible, on the broad margin of the Proverbs of